Hi everyone, welcome to my review of Quentin Tarantino's Jackie Brown in 1997. Here it is on Blu-ray, and watched this a couple of nights ago now. Rewatch, and yes, this is the third Tarantino film, and probably one of the least popular ones. Maybe, these days you could say it's more popular than Kill Bill and The Hateful Eight, of course, with no question, Death Proof. That usually is the least popular Tarantino. The only one I've never seen, I kind of just been putting it off, but yes. Here we are with Jackie Brown, and I got the Blu-ray last week, and yeah, I just thought, watched this in January for the first time. I'd been meaning to check it out, I just never got around to it, and yeah, it never really, grabbed me like, say, some of the other ones of Tarantino. So I kind of thought I'll watch it, once I've got time, and I'll check it out on Blu-ray, and yeah, just kind of put it off, and then finally this year watched it in January, and yes, this film, I can see, very, very at the time, when it came out, people were probably comparing it to Pulp Fiction, and yes, basically, Pulp Fiction is one of the very most popular films of all time. Rightfully so. It's in my top 50. It is one of the best films. Reservoir Dogs, of course, as well. One of the best debut feature films, and again, among the best films of all time. Not as good as Pulp Fiction, but that's kind of it's very hard to top Pulp Fiction. And yes, this film, much more of a low-key film, you could say, than the previous two. It's probably the least, in many ways, the least Tarantino film. Maybe you could say until The Hateful Eight, although it has got these kind of zooms and everything that he has in his his usual work. So you could say in some regards it's the least Tarantino-esque film that he made. And of course, maybe at times people might be put off, the actual plot of this film, which I'm not going to attempt to kind of summarise, but it does involve different, criminals, of course. Samuel Jackson who plays this kind of arms dealer, and Ordell, and he basically is one of the main characters. Of course, the title character Jackie Brown is played by Pam Grier, and she's basically a flight attendant, and she gets caught kind of smuggling stuff for Ordell, the arms dealer, and it all kind of unfolds from there, and involves this bail bondsman played by Robert Forster. He plays Max, and he's one of the main characters. As well, you've got these agents, detectives. One of them being Michael Keaton, who's kind of on the case, and as well you've got another sort of set of characters. Bridget, Fonda, who plays Melanie, and Lewis, who is basically played by Robert De Niro. So that's the main sort of gist of the film. It's kind of, again, it kind of intertwines these kind of stories. Although it's very, very compared to Pulp Fiction, it is more linear. So yeah, there is many differences. This sticks out a lot in his filmography in many regards. It's probably the least Tarantino film stylistically, and it has got probably the most complex plot, if you will. Most of his films are very, very simple to follow. This one, yeah, compared to them, not that it's a highly complex film, but compared to them, it's probably a bit more complex, and it's not not as kind of it's probably more subtle, I suppose, in many regards. And yes, basically, do I think this is one of the best Tarantino's? No, I think it's probably one of his definitely not one of my favourites, but saying that, and here we come, it is a masterpiece for me. I absolutely love the film, and yes, it's on my favourite films list. Absolutely stunning film, even better than when I watched it in January. I think it's just even better than I remembered. Just a wonderful film, really. Very, very different. I can understand, people are probably disappointed with this film, but I think less of the comparing, more of the actual, as a film on its own. I think it's just, and it's pretty much a flawless film. I have no flaws with this. It takes a while to kind of, build all the different threads. Pulp Fiction, Reservoir, kind of straight in there. The openings. This one, it's got less comedy in it as well. It's more of a romance, actually, you could say as well, than a lot of his other works. And yeah, it's kind of more. It's more about the actual plot, the kind of than you could say more than the characters. But again, the characters are amazing in this film. Jackie Brown, the character, is brilliant. Again, it takes a while for her to kind of reveal herself, you could say, and actually for you to realise exactly how good she is as a character. But once she comes into her own, amazing. Pam Grier, brilliant performance in this, really is. Of course, Michael Keaton, an amazing actor. He's really amazing in this film. A bit of a smaller role, but I think he's amazing in the film. And it has got comedy in there, mainly from the kind of De Niro, Samuel parts. When they're together, when they're in the house, that's probably some of the funniest moments, you could say. And the way that culminates as well with De Niro is just unbelievable, really. And the first time I saw it, I was just wow. That was pretty messed up and everything. But yes, basically, this film, it just gets better and better throughout as the film goes on. The way that it kind of builds wonderfully. The dialogue, of course, once again, written and directed by Tarantino. The dialogue is probably not as good as really any of these other films, apart from probably The Hateful Eight that I've seen. But again, it's absolutely brilliant. It's masterful dialogue. It really is. It's less, you could say, references. It's just more kind of its own thing. This film, which is not a thing I'm trying to say it's better than Pulp, and Reservoir for all this, or Kill Bill. It's just very, very different. It is less of the references, you could say, and more just kind of its own unique, subtle thriller. And yeah, kind of a romance as well. Robert Forster and Pam Grier together. The chemistry is wonderful. They kind of form a really beautiful romance. And seeing it again, it kind of one of the main themes of this is kind of aging, I think, actually. And Tarantino really explores this wonderfully, with sincerity, kind of these two characters are kind of pivotal to that, and the performances are just brilliant. A bit more subtle, of course, as I say, but brilliant in this film. Robert Forster is so good. He was a brilliant character, of course, with Max, and I just think it's a thoroughly engaging film. The cinematography, again, much more low key than the previous two, you could say. And yes, it has got these tracking shots, and some of the kind of the trademarks. Got some bits in there, but again, it's a bit more subtle and kind of low key. There's not as much shots, you could say, as Pulp and Reservoir, I believe. But yes, basically, the way this film is shot and edited is brilliant once again, and the use of music is great. It's very, very different, to say Pulp Fiction again. But yes, it's brilliant. The soundtrack, is wonderful. The Delphonics, there's some great songs in this, and the way that music is used for the romance as well, absolutely brilliant. So yeah, this film, I think, if it's compared to say Pulp Fiction, or for me anyway, most of his works, I think it is, it's not as good. But to be a masterpiece, and not even in his top 5 films, and he's not even made 10. That says it all, really. I think Tarantino is just one of the master directors. This film, of course, on Blu-ray as well, it's wonderful. I last saw it on, I think it was Netflix, and as always, streaming is not that good. But yes, this really highlighted how amazing this film looks. The use of colours as well are brilliant in this film, and Tarantino, kind of plays on commercials again as well, which is brilliant. And yeah, I just think you've got so much intensity in this film with the dialogue and the way the film unfolds in its narrative. You've got many, many different themes, of aging, and just very, very powerful themes, and the way that they kind of reveal themselves are just wonderful. This is probably, as I say, the most, in some regards, the most subtle Tarantino film, and it has definitely developed, you could say, a massive following in recent years, and probably the last 10 years. People have kind of said it's one of the very best, and yes, I think it's not as good for me as most of the other ones, but it is a masterpiece. For me, there's no doubt, and I can understand if not everyone will like this film, like say Pulp Fiction. It's not as instant. You're kind of one of the very best films. It is my favourite films list, but I wouldn't say it's an absolute magnum opus like for example Pulp Fiction is. But it is really, it's without flaws for me. I think it does take a while to kind of reveal what's actually it's trying to say. But that's why a rewatch, you know, is kind of it makes the film even better. And you know, this time around, there's different things as well I picked up on that he was going for in there. And yeah, I just think it's a very, very human film. I think, you know, Samuel L. Jackson as well, absolutely brilliant in this film. Of course, he's now been in the most, I believe, the most Tarantino films by number. And yeah, he's very, very different. He's kind of basically very, very menacing in this film, whereas he was, you know, probably the funniest or one of the funniest characters in Pulp Fiction, you know, and yeah, I think it's very, very different for him, but he is brilliant in the film, you know, in his own way, and you know, all these different, you know, side characters, yeah, they're all great as well. De Niro, just absolutely brilliant in this film. Again, you know, he kind of, his performance in this, it's the one that, you know, his character builds and builds, you know, in intensity as the film progresses. You know, it is very, very shocking what happens. But then when you kind of look back, it's a kind of it was bound to happen kind of thing, you know, and very, very, you know, the character's just come out of prison, you know, for 4 years or so, and yes, I believe, yeah, it was a bit under 4 years, and yeah, I just think his you know, kind of subplot in the film, it just culminated, you know, amazingly, and yeah, I think this film is wonderfully directed. The soundtrack is brilliant. I think, you know, performances across the board, you know, are just brilliant. I think really, really, you know, you have to pay attention to the plot. It is kind of you know, bail bondsman stuff and all that kind of you know, it does kind of if you know, if you're not listening, it will, you know, kind of confuse maybe, but it's not. I wouldn't say it's a convoluted plot. It's just very much you know, kind of more heavy going, more intense than really any of these other films. You know, it's very intricate and subtle, nuanced, and yeah, I think it requires a lot, you know, kind of more than these other ones, but it is, you know, a masterpiece for me. I love the film, and you know, I think even more so on this rewatch, you know, I think it is just, it's a masterpiece. I instantly, when I saw it, I thought, that is, you know, it's a great film, it's a masterpiece, but this time I think it's grown on me a bit more. Still not one of my, you know, 5 favourite Tarantinos, but you know, I think as a film in its own right, you know, if this had been, you know, his debut film, it's, you know, it wouldn't have quite have been as been, you know, the kind of the blow up that kind of Reservoir was, but you know, it still would have been, you know, something we'd all be going, wow, you know, probably. But because of Reservoir and Pulp Fiction coming before this film, yeah, maybe people expected it to kind of top them films, and I think, you know, when you actually just judge this film on its own, you know, I think it's a stunning film, and you know, I loved it. Every moment of this film, you know, it's got great comedy in there, although kind of less so than you could say any of these other films. You know, it's got great characters. Again, not as memorable or as, you know, well written as, again, really any of these other films. But this is the thing, when you don't compare it, it is just it is really a masterpiece. And yeah, I think Jackie Brown, you know, easily gets full marks from me. So I think overall, you know, of course, this film gets 100% from me. I think it's an absolute masterpiece. You know, I think it has got a, you know, kind of more complex plot, and you know, is more subtle, as I've said, than the, you know, the rest of the Tarantino films that I've seen. But you know, I think this is a masterpiece. I think as well that this film is very, very strange in its kind of structure. The last kind of hour of the film is literally the whole kind of finale, you could say, in its structure, and you know, it's massive, you know, kind of scenes that take place mainly in this mall or around the mall, and you know, really, it's a kind of very, very you know, geniusly designed piece, you know, and a kind of whole hour really of this film is the kind of the final act, you could say, and it's got all these different you know, kind of twists and turns, and it's just so engaging, and you know, the moments before this, of course, the first sort of hour and a bit are kind of the more of the character building, you know, and kind of setting the tone of the film, and you know, it's got so much great dialogue. This film, it has so much, you know, great performances across the board. You know, you've got De Niro, not one of his, you know, greatest performances, but it is a stunning performance. I think his character was very, very complex and you know, unhinged, and you know, he delivered you know, the goods here. Michael Keaton, you know, kind of Robert Forster, all brilliant here, and of course Pam Grier. You know, I think this kind of plays. Of course, this film plays homage to kind of 70s, certain 70s films and she is just so good in this film, and she's really just an amazing character, Jackie Brown. And yeah, I just think this film is a masterpiece. It's pretty much flawless for me. I have no flaws. I think the soundtrack, the cinematography, the direction is wonderful. And of course the dialogue. Once again, Tarantino, really genius ways that he writes the dialogue. The characters, and yeah, just I think this time around it's more focused. You could say a little bit more on plot than really any of his other films, but it has got great characters as well to kind of support that, and it's got great comedy in there. Again, not as much as his other films, but it really is a stunning film that kind of many powerful themes and ones that really, yeah, they're just very powerfully and subtly explored in this film. And yes, I just think it is a masterpiece. It's not for me at the level of his rest of his films really. In terms of the best 5 or so. It's not in my plus tiers, as you can see. And that's just simply, it doesn't elevate. It doesn't go into the kind of beyond masterpiece kind of special plus tiers that I give. For example, Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction. It doesn't get to them, and of course, from the way I've been describing it, it doesn't get to the level of a couple of other ones as well. But yes, this film, it is a masterpiece. I think it is really a perfect film. It's one of the best of the year. Not the best, but yes, I think really recommend this film. Check it out, and of course the Blu-ray is wonderful. And yes, it's probably it's got more of a following now. It used to kind of be a cult following. More and more people have checked it out, and I think it's getting more love. As the years goes on, but I think it's not his best film. It's not really comparable to Pulp Fiction, but I think it doesn't need to be compared to Pulp Fiction really. And yes, when you do ranking of the directors, especially when they've got like Tarantino, a very small filmography, kind of more of a perfectionist. Yes, naturally, the human mind kind of compares things, but I think in terms of the rating that I give this, it's just without any sort of bias. It does not compare to any other ones that kind of are his best work. But that's the point. It shouldn't really be in that sense. On its own, it is a masterpiece, and I think it's just a brilliant film. It's got really everything you want from a Tarantino. And yes, it's not one of his best, but it is one of his masterpieces. So yes, Tarantino is in my top 10 directors, and can't wait to review the next few films here. Kill Bill is a very divisive film. And you could say that Jackie Brown is kind of now it is probably more popular than Kill Bill, especially Kill Bill 2. And I think mine's going to be a pretty divisive review. I think I do probably prefer it to Kill Bill to a lot of people do when they talk about Tarantino's work. But yes, I can't wait to watch that again for the 7th time in the last few years or something. But yes, thanks for watching my review of Tarantino's masterpiece, Jackie Brown.